Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar session, Peptides Present and Future, the Regulatory Landscape. I want to thank everybody who's joined us today. Wanted to give all of you a quick note. Jim Laval sends his apologies for not being able to participate in today's session. Jim's 90-year-old father, Luigi, passed away this past weekend. He and his family are currently traveling back to his home state of Ohio for Luigi's services. So he definitely sent his regrets to all of us for not being able to be on today. Secondly, I wanted to let all of you know if you've got any questions during the session, feel free to enter them into the Q&A panel it should be down in your bottom section there. And then one of the things that I wanted to cover is that we frequently get asked, is this webinar going to be available on demand? And it will be available. We will have the link out to all of those who have registered within the next 24 to 48 hours. And then we will also be posting this webinar on the peptidesociety.org website, the public-facing site. So if you wanted to go back and re-listen to anything, it will be available on the site as well. So let me just get right in and introduce today's presenter. I'd like to introduce Melissa Stefko. Melissa is the Vice President of Quality Assurance for Wells Pharmacy Network. Additionally, she is a member of the Peptide Certification faculty and also serves on the steering committee for the International Peptide Society. Melissa is an active member of the American Society for Quality as a certified quality auditor and an audit chair for her local ASQ chapter. In addition, she is a member of the Alliance for Pharmacy Compounding, and she serves on their educational committee. So we're just going to dig right in here and start asking Melissa some questions that we previously had submitted from various people, IPS members, A4M members, people who asked a lot of questions at our first module, the first module that A4M offered. So Melissa, can you explain the regulatory definition of a biologic drug product?
Sure. Thank you for the introduction, by the way. I'm really happy to be here and continue on doing educating the people about peptides and the regulatory surroundings of this. And I think it's going to be really great in helping continue our mission and helping patients have access to peptides. So, so I think your question was talking about the biologic drug product. So the way the FDA kind of defines it, and I have their definition right here of what exactly they say it's a virus, therapeutic serum, toxin, antitoxin, vaccine blood. Basically, they're going into that it's any kind of living thing. So it's going to be produced based off of any organism out there. So if it's a peptide is from proteins and different things like that. So anything that's like kind of a living thing, they're considering a biologic. So so they're looking at it like that. But what they're kind of doing is they're updating the definition in various different ways. So we've seen it updated a couple different times. And so it's not just that original definition of, well, it's from a living organism and that sort of thing. So now they're looking at more of the synthetic side of it, of where it's chemically synthesized and not from organic matter, and kind of plugging that into the definition as well. So that's where we're seeing the biologics definition go with the regulatory status.
Great. Can you explain the regulatory difference between a protein and a peptide?
Yeah. So a protein, and this is just, again, and it's not technically the scientific definition of it. This is the FDA's definition of it. So I want to make that really clear, is they have said that peptides are, or proteins are different from peptides. So they've used this bright line rule of looking at the amount of amino acids in the chain to determine whether or not it classifies as a protein or as a peptide. So they're looking at that based on the amino acid length, which is 40 or greater. They're considering a protein. If it's, or I'm sorry, 40, greater than 40 is a protein, 40 or less is going to be a peptide. So that's how they're kind of classifying things. So they're looking at proteins as biologics, and as anything less 40 amino acids or less, they're going to consider them peptides and not be part of that biologic guidance.
Great. So I know this is one of my questions I'm going to kind of throw out there, and I know you could go really long, but I'm wondering if you could briefly kind of give us an overview of 503A versus 503B compounding pharmacies.
Absolutely.
And maybe do a quick introduction on that. So everybody, I know a lot of folks attend our A4M events, and you may see pharmacies in our exhibit hall. Some of them may talk to you about the fact that they're both a 503A, 503B, and you might be like, what the heck does that mean? And I think Melissa can really distill that really nicely, so you understand sometimes when you're talking to some of these pharmacies who might be helping you with peptides and peptide therapies.
Yeah, so a 503A pharmacy is your typical compounding pharmacy. So they would be state regulated. They do fall under the FDA umbrella. So there is some oversight there, but it's typically a patient-specific prescription. So they dispense pursuant to a patient-specific prescription. There are some guidelines following all the state board regulations, but there's some guidelines on anticipatory compounding, how you can compound, what you can compound. So they kind of look at it as, if you're going to compound, if you're not necessarily breaking down an FDA approved product, then you can compound from bulk, but it would have to have an USP or NF monograph. It would have to be on the bulks list, which are for nomination by the public. So it has a couple different things, or a component of an FDA approved drug. So it has a couple different things that restrict it to kind of keep the compounding small to minimize the risk of having mass distribution. And so for a 503B, they've opened up for the FDA's intent is more for drug shortages or filling any hospital market niches like IV bags, syringes, that sort of thing. So in that realm, they do allow you to produce in bulk and distribute to offices, hospitals, clinics, that sort of thing. So there are it's kind of more like a small scale manufacturing facility, because it is FDA regulated, very heavily FDA regulated, still state regulated, but FDA kind of takes the precedence because there is a registration that comes with that. And it is, it typically you're able to break down FDA approved product. So that's where you see more of like repackaging and that sort of thing for hospitals, where you need to have a certain IV bag diluted with an FDA approved drug, morphine or fentanyl or whatever it is that the hospital requires. Mm-hmm. But also they do have a bulks list side as well, where you can do the nominations again and get those approved to be able to compound as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I think it was about March of last year, 2020, where there were some regulatory changes that affected peptide therapy and the definition of what could be done as far as, I believe, from a prescription and compounding standpoint. So can you kind of review what took place and where we are kind of at now? Yeah.
So it's always been very clear that 503B pharmacies cannot produce biologics. Then FDA kind of came out with this, okay, well, we'll allow you to repackage biologics. So if you got a commercial Avastin, for example, you can break it down into smaller doses. Mm-hmm. So they do allow for that, but they really kind of went in on and targeted more of the 503A compounding facilities, because that's where you're seeing the peptides come from. They're coming from 503A because the regulations are a little bit different. So what they did is, not only did they go through and start saying, okay, well, we're going to create this biologic application for drugs that have already been approved previously and now consider them biologics. So then 503A pharmacies cannot do them, which included HCG. I think tesamorelin was another one that we saw that was on that list. So they kind of came in and did that. And the reasoning behind that they said was because peptides are too difficult, and biologics in general are just too difficult to compound. There's a lot of variation in compounding of these types of products, and they want to see more consistency and see them done under more scrutiny in a manufacturing facility that has different controls in place. So that's what their intention, they said that their intention was with this rule.
Okay. So with that, so where do we stand on the present regulatory? And I know, I know our team has experienced, and I don't know how much you can cover this in depth, but our team has, definitely had a lot of questions as it relates to the state of California and peptide therapy. So I don't know if that's something that you can hit on a little bit here, how well you might know what's going on in that state. So I'll toss it back to you there.
Yeah, so for California specifically, I think they've publicly kind of come out and said, peptides are a no-go for California. They don't have, it's difficult to get data on them. It's not part of how they're looking at it too. From what they have said is that they're looking at the bulks list as well. So that bulks list, again, the FDA kind of came up with, where public came through and started nominating a bunch of different things. And, you have to, part of the nomination, you have to provide data, clinical trials, things from NIH, those types of things. And a lot of that doesn't really exist for peptides. So it's very difficult to get these peptides through and on the list because a lot of our evidence is anecdotal, unfortunately, for peptides. So California is taking that black and white rule and saying, okay, it's not on that category 1 of bulk drug substances that FDA is allowing you to compound with. So therefore, you cannot be using it. You cannot be compounded. It cannot be sent into California. So that is California's current stance on it, that they're looking at everything very black and white. That isn't the same for every state board. A lot of state boards don't think that way. A lot of I've heard of some other state boards that believe in peptide therapy and want patient access to these medications. So it just depends on the state board and how they're interpreting the rules and regulations, which are open for interpretation. They haven't been clearly defined, and there have been many legal opinions based on how FDA's the interpretation of the FDA's bulks list. So it's had many different interpretations, and it has yet to really be thoroughly clarified by the agency.
So I'm going to toss you a couple questions I've got that have come in from the audience. And I know this first one, I don't know, how much you know or don't know. They're asking if there's ever a chance that we'll get back thymosin alpha-1 or thymosin beta-4. Do you have any thoughts or know anything that might be going on that?
So thymosin alpha has specifically been called out by FDA because of some marketing that occurred with it for COVID in the industry. So it was shouldn't have been marketed as a treatment or cure for COVID. There is no evidence for that. But it was, so it caught FDA's attention. They made a public statement. California picked it up, also made a statement. So that's kind of unfortunately been tainted. Thymosin beta-4, I believe, has more than 40 amino acids. So it is a protein. So that wouldn't classify as being able to be compounded under the biologics guidance that FDA has produced for compounders.
Okay, I've got one more here. Isn't there also another component to the biologics classification? I saw something from a company that has a product in trials that contains TB4, and they said that the biologic classification of TB4 will allow the company to maintain exclusivity for twice as long as non-biologics. Is that anything that you've read? Because I know there's a lot of things, I shouldn't say a lot, but there are several things in in the process for FDA approval. We know peptides is an emerging therapy from the classification of approved drugs from FDA. So I don't know if this might be one of those.
Yeah, so I have seen other compounders and big pharma companies that are putting these peptides under a biologics application. So if they go that route, certainly it just goes through the same process as any other drug, and is reviewed by the agency, and then it's approved, and then it's a free for all, and then you can purchase it. So
yeah,
that it's just the normal route for drugs to get federal approval.
So I'm going to segue a little bit on this and start talking about, because I thought it was a really good conversation that we had in September in Anaheim with the group that was there for the peptide module 1, and that's about black market peptides, which any one of us can Google and find a lot out there right now. So I wanted you to kind of touch on that, how they're regulated, if they are regulated, and what the potential problems and risks are.
So they aren't regulated. The reason why is because they're not going through the same channels as the compounding pharmacies. So they're not patient specific. There's not a prescription for it. They're falling under sort of, well, first of all, you can't find them. We don't know who's really making these. I've done some research on this, and a couple of them that are online that are on Google. You look for their address, and one's in the post office, one's a virtual office, another one's a virtual office in the UK shared with accountants. Some are on Amazon. I mean, it's all over the place, but you can't find them beyond that. So if you can't find them, it makes it very difficult to regulate. So what makes it more scary is the fact that because you can't find them, you don't know how they're being made. So the quality of these products, are they being made in somebody's garage? You don't know. And that can be very scary, especially for injectable drugs. It just becomes a big safety risk out there. And it's very difficult to shut these places down because you don't know who they are and where they're operating out of. They could be operating out of another country. We just don't know. And it just has made it very difficult for the agency. So when you're purchasing these from a compounding pharmacy, we're required to do our due diligence. So we're required to be sourcing these from FDA approved manufacturers. We're required to be reviewing their certificates as they come in. We're required to have all of these things in place while we're doing sterile compounding of these drugs. And then the testing factor of it all, of making sure, is it sterile? Is it below the pyrogen level that's required for people? So these are all things that are built into the regulations with compounding that is much different than what you're seeing on the black market, because we just don't know what's happening and where they're coming from, where they're sourcing these materials. Are they authentic? We just don't know. And that's a scary place to be.
Right. And any certificates, the certs that typically come with chemicals and all that stuff, none of that's usually available for anybody who's purchasing.
Right.
So I know we keep hitting on the regulatory. So what do you feel the future holds for peptides?
So this is a very difficult one because, I personally know how peptides work, and I've taken some in the past, and, I'm a big advocate for patient access to them. Unfortunately, as everything stands today, peptides have been nominated, so they're waiting for FDA review on the bulks list. Who knows when that's going to happen? They have a huge backlog, and updates are very rare with that. So as of right now, and unless those get put through on the bulks list, we're not going to have that great of a future with peptides unless they start going through the normal regulatory approval process of the BLAs. So we really need, the support of physicians and patients that have these anecdotal evidence to provide, and different things of that nature, so that we can be able to preserve patient access to these things. But as of right now, as it stands, there is war on peptides in the regulatory realm of compounding.
Right. And I think I'll just jump in there. And I know some of you who are probably on listening with us have been past members of IPS and or you've rejoined, and if you've rejoined, you know that our member site isn't up. Only the public facing site is open right now. And one of the things that Jim and his team and our team at A4M and supporting what we're trying to do with the monographs, which we will also include FDA monographs. I want everybody to know that. We're going to have FDA products on there, but we're going to have the other monographs on there as well. We're trying to provide a level of evidence. We've got a grading scale of 1 through 8 to really let you, the person who's looking into this peptide therapy or a particular peptide, know what type of evidence is available out there. Like if it's something that's only been used in a rat study, you're going to know that clearly. And we are also trying to secure as many peer-reviewed research pieces of information for the particular peptide as possible. So we've really, it's a big job to redo these. We felt like we needed to go that extra mile on this because we feel like this is an important therapeutic for all of you, and for similar to what, Melissa, what we're starting into conversation-wise is sort of the advocacy to make sure that we continue to have peptides available for your patients. So with that, we're looking forward to launching that. Our fingers crossed we'll launch. We won't have all the peptide monographs up when we launch the member site, but we will have a good handful of peptides there with lots of evidence. If anybody's ever uses facts and comparison, which Melissa, I know you're probably familiar with, we're really designing the information that we're going to share very much like a facts and comparison, which a lot of pharmacists use. So really giving you a lot of robust information compared to what was there previously. The other thing that we're going to do, and this goes to something that Melissa just said, is that we're going to ask you, if you're a member of IPS, submit a successful patient case study. We, obviously redacted, we don't want patient names, but we want to know patient outcomes because we want to start building this advocacy so that we've got some evidence and some proof as we move down in this journey on what happens with peptides, to submit to some regulatory body, and get more involved in that side of things. So with that, I'm going to seg to another question that just came in. Somebody said, can you give us any guidance on how to share our interest in prescribing these substances to malpractice carriers, that's a good topic, especially those who are FDA sensitive. And I think that goes to the whole advocacy thing. I think that's a great question and I think would be fun to get into.
Yeah. I can't comment too much on malpractice carriers. I'm not an attorney, but what I can comment on is getting access to peptides for patients. There's savepeptides.org. There's just clinical peptides or IPS. There's an expert committee that USP has established to create NF monographs or USP NF monographs for biologics. So show interest in joining those because they need medical professionals on these committees to be able to input what's going to be required to test these biologics. And if that monograph is created, then compounders are able to compound it under a 503A facility, so pursuant to a patient's prescription. So you want to be able to get these monographs created and hopefully get those put through so we can continue to have access. A couple other things are FDA's created a clinical pharmacology of peptides. They're establishing a public docket for that. That is available on regulations.gov. You can just type in peptides and you'll see how the FDA is looking for more support on those types of things and looking for the public to comment and provide those that data that Amy's talking about in those clinical cases that you've had, so that they can look at things and they do want to help and they do want to provide safe medication to the public. And this is their way in doing that because they do know that the black market side of this does exist. And
Mhm.
if taking it away from compounding pharmacies doesn't mean that patients aren't going to still try to get it and can get it, whether or not it's, the same is another story, but it's still out there.
Yeah. So I think that's a great question. I mean, I know, obviously, in the history of sort of my career, this malpractice carrier, this is a great question. I know a lot of you have been faced with that when prescribing bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. I know that's something that's come up over the years. And I think with the emergence of peptides, there could be, some of the pharmacy advocacy groups also may jump into the arena on this. And one of the things I want to let everybody know, we will make sure that we get you all this information specifically on how to, either have access or to go to the site to look at what might be going on with peptides, or to any of the advocacy groups. I know that you mentioned the savepeptides.org is one of the organizations. IPS, obviously, with our relaunch, we're trying to, we want to get into that arena. We're not quite there, but we definitely want to get into that arena because we understand the importance. So stay tuned for that. Let's see. So do you feel, is it your general opinion? I know what my opinion is. Do you think more and more peptides will get FDA approval in the future?
I do. I really do. I've seen it in the pipeline. It's been slow to start. I think, and don't quote me, but I think off the top of my head, in a few years' time, we saw, I think, 208 drugs get approved, and only maybe 15 to 20 were peptides.
Right.
So it hasn't been, the squeaky wheel always is heard. So, now that it's getting louder and louder in the industry, and now that people are seeing this, and a lot of patients know about peptides, this is where it's their time to shine. They're going to start getting approved. And I know of a lot of places that are currently putting them through trials and trying to get approval on them, and some compounders as well. So
yeah, that's what I was going to say too.
Yeah, it's out there. It's happening. It's expensive, and it does take a long time. So it's not going to be anytime soon, but it's coming, and it's going to be rolling out.
And I think your numbers were pretty spot on as far as what peptides had been approved. I want to say, I think when I looked this up, there might be something like 60 some in the pipeline right now for FDA approval.
There's a lot.
There's a lot potentially coming out. I want to ask this question, and it may be super elementary, and it isn't one that you and I talked about ahead of time. How is it, or can you explain why, let's say OTC type product, there are some companies out there like BPC 157 is sort of like an OTC supplement product. So can you explain why that is, how that's happening?
Yeah, so those are being classified as dietary supplements. So those are regulated by the FDA, but much differently. It's much different ballgame.
And is it more because it is a dietary supplement? It's by mouth. It's not an injectable. All that kind of good stuff.
Right. Yeah. So a lot of people, and I mean, I know that one of the big kind of quotes out there right now is it's not FDA approved. But what people don't understand is you go into your grocery store or CVS and you look at all the vitamins, none of those are FDA approved. They're all dietary supplements. Mm-hmm. And it's just an FDA regulated industry. What does that mean? You might get an FDA visit. You might not. I mean, it just depends on how big you are. They look at, their visits are based on risk factor. If you're small and you're making, BPC, like you said, and it's just, a very small site, and you're only shipping within the state. I mean, you may go 10 years without getting an FDA visit. You just don't know. I mean, these are things that how people fly under the radar. Mm-hmm.
So, and again, I'm going to throw another question at you that we didn't really discuss either. So I know one of the sort of another emerging area that peptides is with skincare product, and sort of in that aesthetic type area. Do you have any comment on that, like what you're seeing? I don't know if at Wells, you guys, if you're compounding anything as far as skincare. I don't know.
No, we're not in like creams or anything like that. I do have a couple friends in the industry that have seen other doctors. They're doing very strange things. So they've seen, there's like the new fad with threads, which is like the virtual facelift. They're dipping threads in peptides before they're implanting them. So where are they getting these peptides? I think they're coming off the black market, unfortunately, because they're patient specific. If you already get them now, if they're dipping threads in them, how long are they maintaining sterility? Because you have to obviously open the vial, and right there you've broken sterility. So some of these things can get really scary. But as far as like creams and things, we aren't doing that. But I think it is the way of the future. I know that there are a lot of bigger companies, derm companies out there that are doing it. And
there's already products out there.
Yeah. So I think that it's very positive, and it's a direction that a lot of skincare will go in, and they do advocate for that.
So are there any clinicians out there that you've heard of that are doing, with hair replacement, with anything any peptide related to that?
Yes, so that is actually one that we do. We do that one, and that I think it's.
Is it direct peptide, or is it in conjunction with PRP or anything? I'm curious. I don't know.
I'm not really sure. I can't speak to that completely because I'm not super familiar with it. But what I do know is that there's not enough word out about it. And unfortunately, compounders, again, another restriction in the industry, we can't advertise. So
for what it's for. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're kind of like, here's what we have to offer, and then left to the doctors to figure out, well, what can I use that for? I've never heard of that. Why would I use that? And that's why, A4M and IPS and those types of things are so great, because you're able to, educate the doctors on what you can use these for. And then we're able to go behind and provide them. So,
yeah. And that's good. So we touched on, the advocacy. I'm trying to think, is there anything else you want to add into this discussion?
Just the importance of getting out there, and you can contact your congressperson. They're big advocates for compounding as well, and letting them know that these are medications that you can continue to treat the symptom with other medications, but these peptides, in my experience and from what I'm hearing in the industry, are treating the root cause of it. And that's more of that personalized medicine approach, and really being able to get patients access to things that, that they want access to, and affordably as well. So, the advocacy is it's really key to be able to keep these types of things around and be able to service those patients.
All right. Well, does anybody else in the audience who's on the line have questions? Because I think we're done with our discussion. I don't know if anybody else has any other questions. I do want to mention A4M. We've relaunched our peptide certification course. It's now 2 modules, 3 days each. We did the first one in Anaheim live. It is available online as well, on demand. To take, and then we will have our second module in at our A4M World Congress in December, on the 10th, 11th, and 12th of December. So our peptide module 2, which will take a deeper dive. We will have, I know, on our I believe the second day, we are going to talk a little bit about the hair and some aesthetic type processes with some of our instructors, Joe Cleaver, Dr. O'Neill Smith. We'll be touching on some of those things. So, if you're interested in peptides, if you've already taken A4M's peptide certification, that is available to retake at a discounted price, a really nice, sweet discounted price. So I would encourage you to consider that. I think Jim's done a really fantastic job recanoodling the curriculum that we have. So we've been excited in launching this. So if there's no other questions, I think we're good to go this evening. And I want to let everybody know we do IPS plans to do monthly webinars. We're hoping to do them the second or third week on a Thursday evening, not a Wednesday. This was kind of an abnormal time for us to do it. So be prepared and be on the lookout for some notifications on that. And then lastly, one of the things I was talking to Melissa about, we feel, very passionate that understanding the regulatory landscape, and as we know this is moving and changing and we're learning new things, we feel like this might be sort of a quarterly discussion that we're going to do with you folks if you want to sign on and listen. But we definitely feel like this is a good discussion to keep having. We know you're going to have questions that come up that you might be unsure of, and we want to be able to be a resource to answer those questions. And again, these will be questions also available on the member site when we do launch that in IPS. And I really appreciate anybody who's on the line that's been really patient with us as we get that ready to go. We will have the community forum back up. Our great steering committee, of which Melissa's one of the folks on the steering committee, Jim, Kent Holtorf, Dr. Erica Schwartz, they've all agreed to participate on the community forum. So they'll be there and available to help answer questions when that gets launched and when we start having all those questions come in. So I think we'll have some great discussions there too. So fingers crossed that launches in November, early part of November. So Melissa, thanks for joining us. And again, if anybody's got any questions, feel free to drop us a question either at peptidesociety.org or through A4M as well. And we'll make sure we get them answered. Thanks, Melissa.
All right, thank you. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.